Chapter 20 of Workers Together. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Workers Together, or an Endless Chain, by Pansy. Chapter 20. Sunday Lessons. What a morning of beauty it was! The budding of summer. There were those in the Packard Place Sabbath School who remembered always afterwards the very color of the sunshine as it reached after the flowers on the desk, and seemed, as they thought it over, to smell again the fragrance of the blossoms. It was a beautiful Sabbath school room. I cannot remember whether I have told you about it. It was not that the furnishings were so much richer and grander than they are in many another church, though they were grand enough, but the most exquisite harmony in color and design prevailed. Certainly, if beautiful surroundings are helpful for the development of religious truth, the teachers in Packard Place Sabbath School should have done a good work. Miss Mason was in her accustomed seat, midway between the organ and the folding doors, on the right of the grand central aisle. 5 of her girls were there in all the glory of their very best summer toilets, and really their best was not to be looked down on. In winter, when seal jackets and ostrich plumes and velvet dresses marked the distinctions in costumes, these girls looked on hopelessly, making no attempt to compete. But when the delightful season of gossamer robes and delicate lace bonnets came again, it was wonderful what a few dollars and a good deal of skill and taste could accomplish. The initiated saw of course at a glance when the lace was cotton, and the flowers but an imitation of French workmanship. Yet what fine imitations some of them were, and how exceedingly pretty were the Valenciennes laces! Hester Mason had appeared on the scene again this morning for the first time in 3 weeks. She had sat up until long after midnight, making herself a bit of a lace bonnet, trimmed with a real French flower that had been damaged in the packing, and so had been sold to her for a trifle. The damaged portions had been skillfully covered with a knot of lace, and the bonnet was a beauty. The rest of her toilet, from the bright, large-colored muslin, a style which just then chanced to be in vogue, to the pretty kids which encased a pair of plump, well-shaped hands, was in remarkably good taste. Hester had not studied Joy Saunders all the winter to no purpose. Intimate friends the 5 girls were; that is, they were on sufficiently intimate terms to exchange nods and smiles and meaning glances, to pass whispers down the seat for each to enjoy, and to join in the laugh that rippled out every now and then, despite the faint pretense of subduing it. When one stopped to think of it, what a bewildering mass of flesh and blood did that schoolroom present before troubled teachers! More than one looked at her class of beautiful creatures, arrived at that mysterious age when one does not know whether to address them as girls or young ladies, and wondered what to do with them. Next to Miss Mason sat Joy Saunders's girls, bright, gay, beautiful. Their very toilets were bewildering. Summer silks or soft-tinted suitings, ruffled and tucked and flounced and plaited, fancy skirts and cutaway jackets, and jaunty hats trimmed with bright plumes, and mosses and grasses and vines. Delicate, exquisitely fitted 4 and 5 and 6-buttoned kids, and yellow frizzed hair and brown curly hair, and sashes and bows, and dainty fans and perfumed handkerchiefs, and any and everything else which goes to make up the irresistible and irrepressible young person in the enchanting, rose-colored age when they are neither children nor women, but rosebuds waiting for their hour to bloom, and are more exquisite in the budded state than any full-blown rose in the garden. Joy found herself looking at them timidly, awed by the very abandon with which they dashed at this mysterious and solemn thing which we call life, and played with it as a toy. The widow of Nain, that was the subject of the lesson. How was she to fit that strange story to suit their moods? The very name widow suggested something shadowy to them. The young wives, sitting in their class near at hand, read the words with a shiver, and glanced across the aisles at their husbands with little tender smiles and heart murmurs of gratitude that the word did not apply to them. They fancied that they somewhat grasped its meaning. There were mothers in that classroom who thought of their only sons, their special objects of love and pride, and felt throbs of sympathy for that mother who lived in Nain, and who followed the bier on that morning long ago. There was one black-robed woman who, as she read with the school the sentence, "The only son of his mother, and she was a widow," put her arm gently around her only son, and thought of that day when she was widowed, and comprehended that there were depths of sorrow which even she had not reached. Nay, there was one who could not read the words, but who, with bowed head and streaming eyes, thought of the graves, side by side, of husband and only son, and felt in all its bitterness the depths of that widowed mother's sorrow, and longed with all her soul for the time when that wonderful voice should speak to her dead with his penetrating tone, "I say unto thee, arise." Joy felt that she could talk with any of these about the lesson, but she could hardly help a sigh as she looked at her girls. What was to be said to them? But if Joy Saunders was at a loss, what can be said of Miss Mason? She had not studied and prayed over the lesson as Joy had; neither was she in the indifferent stage when what was said to the girls seemed of little consequence. Her talk with Dr. Everett had had the usual effect. She was roused and unhappy, anxious to do some work, and conscious that she did not know how. The widow suggested to these girls of hers only a giggle. There were of necessity so many scenes to pass through preceding that name, so many romantic and interesting experiences, and they were so far removed from the reality of any of it that positively it was simply funny to them. They looked over at the boys in Mr. Ludlow's class, and exchanged bows and smiles, and whispered to one another. Suppose you could have heard one of the whispers, what do you think it would perhaps have been? Why, this: "Tell Nellie to remember that she may be Fred Peters' widow one of these days. He looks rather pale and solemn this morning." This remarkable sentence was passed down the class until it reached the said Nellie, and she blushed indeed, but her heart was not sufficiently touched to keep her from the giddy little laugh that followed. It was well for their teacher that she did not hear this; she heard and saw enough. And yet you are not to suppose that these 5 girls were heartless. They had a quick and ready sympathy for sorrow. Had they been of that procession, as it wound slowly and sadly out of the gates of Nain, without doubt their eyes would have been red with weeping. Indeed, there were some who, if the story had been about a dead mother, would have looked grave for a minute, and have thought of their mothers at home. But this sorrow came so long ago, and the city where it occurred was so dim and unreal a place to them, that they fluttered their fans and their ribbons, and said their gay little undertoned sentences to one another, and cared no more for the widow of Nain and her great sorrow and her great joy than did the bright-winged butterfly who hovered about the flowers on the desk. Miss Mason struggled hard. She had tried to shape in her own mind some of the hints which Dr. Everett had given her. She attempted to locate the place where the scene was laid, and so make it real to them. To this end she asked a question, and she asked it of Hester Mason. "Where is the city of Nain, Hester?" Now, as you may readily suppose, Hester was not versed in Bible geography, and of course she had not studied this lesson. She flushed a little, and it is possible she might have been embarrassed had not the mischievous eyes of 2 of the girls said plainly that they knew no more about Nain than she did. "I don't know," she said at last, speaking lightly, and with that upward inflection which almost adds, "and I don't care." Fanny Tarrant was the pretty-faced, good-natured special dunce of the class. She did not know enough to know that she knew nothing. But because she was good-natured and pitied the evident distress of the teacher, she essayed to help. "Miss Mason, isn't it somewhere in Europe?" This gave the girls excessive amusement. "Oh, Fanny," one said, "are you sure it isn't in America?" "Perhaps it is in Florida," suggested another. "Or right here in this city," said Hester Mason with a burst of laughter. "Most things are." Whereupon they all laughed good-naturedly, Fanny with the rest, none of them quite knowing at what. Miss Mason, having been posted the evening before as to the geographical position of Nain, hastened to explain that for which the girls cared nothing. Then she tried to draw their attention elsewhere. It was easily drawn elsewhere, but not by her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. Thus read one of the girls at her teacher's request, and then, with not even a comma between, Girls, only look at Fred Peters's mustache. I do believe he waxes it. He ought to braid it, said Hester Mason, and tie it with a blue ribbon to match his eyes. And then she read, And he came and touched the bier, and Miss Mason had reached the utmost limit of her patience. Stop, she said. Wait. What are you thinking of? Is it possible that you have no sense of reverence? About whom are you reading? But Hester had not meant to be irreverent. She had not even noticed of whom she was reading. Something unusual in Miss Mason's voice held her quiet, and the teacher tried in all earnestness to impress the giddy group with the fact that they were reading about death, the one experience which was absolutely sure, sooner or later, to come to each one of them. For the space of 5 minutes they felt abashed, yet even then the strongest feeling that most of them had was that they had been rude to Miss Mason, not to the Lord Jesus. No more unreal presence than his did this world contain for them. Their hearts refused to take in his existence. One of the points in the lesson which Dr. Everett had made had been, Christ a present help in trouble. He thought of the Curtis girl, and of the sad fact that her mother, who had never rallied from the loss of the beautiful baby, was making swift preparations to go to him. Trouble was hastening on for the Curtis girl. Could not Miss Mason help her with that lesson? But it transpired that she was not there to be helped, and Miss Mason, ignoring that fact, tried to impress the thought on these girls who had, most of them, very little comprehension of any trouble associated with death. You know, Fanny, she said, trying to be personal, that the time will surely come when either you will stand by Harry's coffin, or he by yours. It is not as though you could think that perhaps this would never happen. It is something that must come. Fanny looked serious for 2 minutes, and tried to realize the truth of this. Harry was her handsome young brother, of whom she was proud. And Miss Mason believed her to be more impressible than the rest of the girls. But on the other side of the room sat Harry, at this moment aglow with life and health, and keeping his teacher's wits on the alert to hold him in check. Fanny glanced over at him. How was it possible to associate death with him? She turned her gaze from him to herself, and the subject of her thoughts was presently made apparent by a half-audible whisper, Don't these gloves match my dress nicely? I had a perfectly awful time matching them. And the half-hour was gone. The warning bell sounded its note, 5 minutes for closing the lesson. What was Miss Mason to do with them? She realized that the lesson had hardly been begun. The air had been full of new gloves and fans and laces, and it had all been too much for her. Her honest desire to be helpful had come to naught. She looked from one to another of her girls as they fluttered and whispered, and passed a paper of caramels to the boys in the class across the aisle. She looked down at her lesson paper, and longed for the next bell. The golden text stared at her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. Just then Hester Mason laughed louder than she had before, and Fanny Tarrant joined. Then did Miss Mason speak aloud the thought that came to her. Oh, girls, when the Lord sees you, what will he say? Then she turned away, and the bell rang again, and the hour was over. Do you want to know what Miss Mason did? She went home and shut herself in her room and cried. Poor soul, she was utterly discouraged. She had never before felt so strong a desire to be a real teacher, and had never before so utterly failed. As for the girls, they fluttered out with the crowd. They were none of them from Christian homes. They all belonged to the stamp of family that left it entirely optional with themselves whether they went to church, or whether they did anything else that might chance to please their fancy. Going to church? Said one. Oh, dear, no, it's too pleasant weather for church. Besides, I'm tired of sermons. Let's go to the park. It'll be lovely there today. Come on, Hester, will you go? I don't know, said Hester irresolutely. No, I don't believe I will. I don't feel like the park. I guess I'm going home. They exclaimed and urged, but she broke away from them and went on alone. At the very next corner stood a trap which Satan had carefully prepared for her unwary feet. Robert Parks, who for the past few weeks had been taking rapid downward strides, had settled on this Sabbath morning as the time to break away from old superstitions and restraints, and join an excursion party to a neighboring city. Moreover, he had alternately coaxed and laughed at Austin Barrows until he had prevailed on him to overcome what Robert called old-fashioned notions, and keep him company. The determination to make Hester Mason one of the party was an afterthought that pleased Robert greatly, and he waited at the street corner to carry it out. It did not occur to poor Hester to take umbrage at being joined on the street by a young gentleman who had evidently been lying in wait for her. You are to remember that she had not been guarded all her life by a wise and loving mother. She had never so much as heard that the daughters from sheltered homes allowed none of these things. So she greeted Robert Parks with a smile. "I wonder what you will say to keeping me company today?" he asked her, with the gay air of one on very familiar terms. "I have one of the nicest plans arranged that has come into my head in a long time. This is the day of days for a garden concert. Isn't the air fine? Sorry I couldn't have given you longer notice, little girl, but pleasures gotten up in a hurry always turn out the best. Did you see me? I was watching to see if you were going to join that set. I hadn't planned just how to get hold of you in that case, for there really isn't much time to spare." He was taking for granted her acceptance of his invitation, if invitation it could be called. But she interrupted him to ask, "Where do you want to go?" "Why, to the garden concert. You have heard of it, surely. A large party is going. When I saw what a lovely morning it was, I knew that the garden was just the place for you and me to spend the day." "On the excursion train! Robert Parks, I wouldn't do it." Never was a person more astonished than was Robert Parks at this reply. He knew that remonstrances against such excursions were common enough, but he had not expected one from such a source. "Why not?" he said, trying to conceal his surprise. "A sacred concert is a good enough place to go, I'm sure." "Yes, but on a Sunday train." "Bother the Sunday train," he said impatiently. Scruples from Hester Mason were irritating. "I don't ask it to run on Sunday, and it will go anyhow, whether I ride on it or not. I might as well have the convenience of it. It is only an hour's ride; time enough to go to church all day after that if you want to. What's the matter, Hester? I didn't know you were squeamish." Hester laughed a little. "I'm not squeamish," she said, "at least not generally. I'll own that I feel queer today. We had the oddest kind of a time in Sunday school. I guess Miss Mason feels queer too. I can't get something that she said out of my mind. It didn't fit that Sunday train a bit, and I do wish you wouldn't go." "Miss Mason had better preach to herself," declared Robert in great disgust. "She went down on the Sunday train the day Governor Burke was buried." Chapter 21.